Welcome, fellow freaks, geeks, and nostalgic peeps, to my channel, Slime and Slashers, where, yeah, we talk about everything from Nickelodeon slime to horror movie slashers, but plenty of stuff in between, including books. Today's video is no different. It is a video about books, because we'll be talking about all the books that I read in April for my readathon, old school April. Alright guys, stay right there, and right after this short intro, we'll get into what I thought about all of the books. Welcome back, guys! Okay, I'm gonna go through these rather quickly because I did talk about, I think, every single thing I read during the month in a vlog. So if you guys missed the vlogs, I will link them below, and that's where you can find my very in-depth thoughts on these books. I'll go through quickly the ratings here and quickly what I thought about them, because I wanted to do a special wrap-up because Old School April was my event. I loved hanging out with all my co-hosts. I loved interacting with the awesome community we made over on the Discord, and I loved chilling with people during sprints. So guys, if you guys were a part of it, thank you so much. It means so much to me, and I know it meant a lot to my co-hosts too, and a very special thank you to my co-hosts, because I just adore them, and I'm so glad they were a part of it with me, because it was very, very special, and I'm still freaking thinking about April, and I'm actually missing it quite a bit. I can't wait till next April. We will be having Old School April again in 2024, so if you missed it, have no fear, we will be having it again next year, baby! The first book I read during the month of April was Night of the Bat by Paul Zindel. This was for our animal attack prompt, and I had a good time with this. You know, it's nothing amazing in terms of story. The characters are kind of flat and not the best. This younger guy, I guess he's in middle school or high school, goes to visit his dad, who is out in the Amazon studying bats. Something's amiss though, because people are turning up missing, and lo and behold, it's because they're being attacked by a freaking giant bat. The best part about this book, I think, is how gruesome the attacks are, despite this being a book that is geared towards younger readers. At first I thought it was a middle grade book, but technically on Goodreads it's labeled as a young adult book, but either way, it's pretty gory, and there was definitely scenes discussed about a bat sucking someone's brain out of their eye sockets, which was insane. I was like, what? I gave this a 4-star. Not perfect, but in terms of animal attack, the attack scenes were top-notch in my opinion. Next up, I read Whisper of Death by Christopher Pike. So while I was reading this during the vlog, I actually gave it a 4, but since then I've been thinking about it and really contemplating if this book has a hidden message, which is not that hidden, about women shouldn't do certain things. Like, it's almost like a warning, like, oh, bad things could happen if you do this. And so because of that, I actually lowered it to a 3.5. I thought the mystery behind everything was very interesting, and the story itself was entertaining, except for it felt like it was a message. And so because of that, I'm giving it a 3.5. Otherwise, it would have been a 4, maybe even higher. In terms of entertainment value, it was interesting. I liked it a lot, but I did not like the messaging, and I don't agree with the messaging. And so because of that, I thought about it afterwards, and I was like, 3.5 at the most. That's what I'm going to give it. Next up, I read The Mound by Brian G. Berry. This was a short little book, only 53 pages. I believe it was on KU. I don't really recall 100%, but I know I read it on my Kindle. This was nothing extraordinary or anything. It was okay. It was entertaining. There wasn't much to it. This older man, there's a mound that pops up after this storm, and it seems to be causing supernatural things to happen. This man has to contend with what happens. I gave it a 3.5 star. Nothing that knocked my socks off, to be honest. Next up, I read a Goosebumps book, The Ghost Next Door. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 4-star because it had some emotional elements at the end that I wasn't expecting. It turned out differently than I expected. The mystery itself, I could kind of guess where it was going, but it was very enjoyable, and I had a very good time reading it. Goosebumps are really more about the experience and having something lighter in between darker, more adult reads to break things up. So this did what I wanted it to do. It accomplished what I wanted, and yeah, I had a great time, like I usually do with almost any Goosebumps. Next up, I read The Night Runners by Joe R. Lansdale, and I loved this. It was super gory, super fast-paced, very tense at times. I gave it a 4.5 star. It had an audiobook, so that was a little bonus there too. Overall, a really, really entertaining read, but not for everyone. There's definite triggers that you should look up if you're interested. This, of course, is a vintage horror book, and so because of that, you know, you do have to be very careful. Books written back in the 80s and 90s, totally different from today. You don't find, you know, trigger warnings or content warnings at the beginning of the book or the end of the book, so you've got to do your due research if you are concerned. And I would say this one does have some things that you should watch out for. I did think it was entertaining, though, and very stressful in terms of being the reader wanting some of the characters to survive. Next up, I read another Animal Attack book. I read Killer by Peter Tonkin. This one I've been wanting to read forever. Some of the Animal Attack scenes were incredible. There was this crazy standoff between the pod of orcas and some walruses. It was wild. It was like a freaking battle of the beasts between the whales, the killer whales, I should say. They're not actually whales. They're actually of the dolphin family. But anyway, there was a big freaking battle between the killer whales and the walruses, and it was wild. These people get stranded on an ice floe, and they're just chilling, and all of a sudden, these orcas attack. That's not what usually orcas do out in the wild. They don't just go attacking people, but an orca that had been trained to become a killer by the government had escaped and led his own pod, and out in the wild, he's like, yo, I hear people, let me attack. These are my instincts from when I was trained. So yeah, that's kind of like the basic gist of the story, and more unfolds from there. This wasn't a perfect read. There were some parts that I felt were a little slow. However, there were a lot of great animal attack scenes and a lot of great parts in general. It was overall a very, very good time. I'm going to give this a 4. I think in the vlog I gave it a 4.5, but after sitting with it a while, I would give it a 4. But guys, a 4 is nothing to snuff at. That's a solid rating. I still had a wonderful time reading this. It's still in the upper tier of animal attack stories that I've ever read, for sure. Next up, I read Drawing Blood by Poppy Z. Bright. This was a fantastic book. Very extreme. You can't just go into a Poppy Z. Bright book and think that everything is going to be subtle and no. Poppy Z. Bright hits you over the head with gore a lot of times and crazy imagery, and Drawing Blood is no different. I did really like it, but I did not like it as much as Exquisite Corpse, which is the only other book that I've read by Poppy Z. Bright. So out of the two, Exquisite Corpse is definitely my favorite, but Drawing Blood was still very enjoyable. We've got these two flippin' guys who have messed up pasts and who are just really, really struggling with their past and with what their family dynamic have done to them, and struggling how to find love, essentially, as adults, and also dealing with kind of like a haunted house situation as well. So overall, like I said, very, very enjoyable, super well written. I love Poppy Z. Bright's prose. It's just so beautiful, but also very macabre and creepy at the same time. And it's a perfect mixture. It just goes together so well. So I gave this a 4 star as well. Just really well written, and I do recommend this book to people who like extreme type of horror. Next up, definitely my least favorite book of the entire month, Barracuda Swarm. This was yet another animal attack book. You guys know I love a good animal attack book. This didn't have enough barracuda attacks. This was a weak attempt at an animal attack book. I did not like it. I believe it was on KU, or at least I read it on my Kindle, I know that. I just did not have a good time. I gave this a 3 star. I could have even given it lower, but I mean, I guess really looking back, probably is more like a 2.5 star. It wasn't like the worst thing I've ever read in my life, but it definitely wasn't that great. So it was a disappointment. I wanted way more barracuda attacks, and I was just so disappointed. Next up, I read Mallrats by Ivy Tholen, and thank you so much to Ivy Tholen for sending me this physical copy. She is so sweet. I did love Tastes Like Candy. I read that last year. And I also, earlier this year, read her other novel, Permanent Damage. And so this was my third book that I've read by her, and it kind of completes all of the books she has out published right now. So I've read everything she's written, and right now, she is an auto-buy author for me. This was awesome. This is a slasher book taking place back in the 90s, and it's fantastic. There's lots of great 90s references. I do think it's a little long. That's what my one criticism. And I don't like the characters as much as I like the characters from Taste Like Candy. Taste Like Candy, that slasher book, has characters that you really love and care about, and are unique because they're very likable. Not every character in this book, Mallrats, is likable, but the kills are still good. It's still entertaining. I love the mall setting, but you also get, other settings around town. Our main character is obsessed with some horror movies, so you get lots of horror movie discussion. And I just had a really great time. And can you deny this cover? Look how badass and amazing this cover is. So the cover alone, I think, warrants at least a 4, but it's a 4.5 because I just love Ivy Tholen's writing. This book is long, as I said. It could have been shorter, but I never felt like it dragged. I never felt hesitant to pick this back up. I'm trying to remember how many pages exactly it is. 381 pages, and it flew by, in my opinion. I did not have audio, but it read very quickly for being that long. So super enjoyable. Not as great as Tastes Like Candy, in my opinion, but still awesome nonetheless. And still, I would recommend to people who like slasher books and also like books with a nostalgic flair to them, because this was set back in the day, and so all the references were just such a joy to read. And I was like, yes, lots of Britney Spears references for a certain reason, and I was like, oh yes. I don't know, I like Britney. She's from Louisiana, so sue me. She's my girl. I love her. You can argue about if you think she's a good singer or not, but Louisiana, yeah, go Britney Spears, whatever. I love this book. It was so much fun. Next up, Scanlines by Todd Kesling. I read this for a book with old technology in the story, and it was fantastic. This was my first 5-star read of the entire month, so I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, finally, a pure 5-star read. Super quick, super dark. Not a little fun novella at all. You may be able to tell by the cover that I held up that it is a very dark subject matter. You've got content warnings for suicide, and it's very graphic and very heavy, but because of how powerful the story was, that's what made me give it a 5. And I thought about it for quite a while after finishing it. Next up, I read We Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix. I was so glad I read this. This is also a 5-star. This was my book club choice, my private book club that I run with my friend Kat. We chose this as our official club read, and it was fantastic. This also has old school, vibes, because part of the book takes a look at the main character's past when she had a band back in the 80s and 90s. I think it was the 90s. And it was just wonderful. Our main character, her name is Chris, and she used to be in a heavy metal band, and Chris goes through a lot in this book, trying to confront what went down when her band broke up at the end of their run together. And one of her bandmates remained a musician and remained successful, and that seems kind of fishy. Not everything seems right with that. So she kind of investigates and finds there's a lot more to why he's so successful than what it seems like on the surface. And yeah, shit goes to hell, basically. I had a great time with this. There's some gory parts. It reads more like a thriller in some ways, but then some of the later scenes, it definitely reads like horror. So because of the characters, I loved this. I think there were still things that were left unanswered at the end of the book. But overall, because I like the characters so much, this is actually my second favorite Grady Hendrix novel, just because I connected with the main character, Chris, so very much, and I thought it was so cool that we had a badass musician who was a strong female main character in this book. It was awesome. I really loved her. I loved spending time, in her head and hearing her thoughts, and yeah, it was wonderful. I know this book wouldn't be a 5 for everybody, I think, but it was for me. And I'm just a big Grady Hendrix fan in general, so I was apt to like this no matter what. I think I've given all of his books 5 stars. So, like, you could argue that maybe not every one really deserves 5 stars, but, like, I don't know. They're just so easy to read and so marvelous, and lots of humor, but also lots of feeling within the pages. And the characters, I just connect with a lot of his characters, and I think he's really good at writing women characters. Not everyone agrees with me, but I think he's pretty good at it. So, very enjoyable time. I'm glad I finally read this one, even though I've owned it for years. Next up, I read Head Like a Hole. This was for my friend Amy's book club, the Dark Hearts book club. You could find Amy at Amy Noel Reads. Please subscribe to her channel if you're not already. She is fantastic, and this book ended up being my very favorite book of the entire month. I freaking had such a blast with this. It had so many elements that I just love. I can't even really explain what it's about. Is everything black and white, and is everything answered in this book? Not really, but the horror imagery is out of this world. This had really creepy elements. This had elements that reminded me of Hellraiser. It had elements that reminded me of I Know What You Did Last Summer. It had so much going for it. I freaking love this, and it had retro vibes because I believe this took place in the 90s as well. Yeah, in the mid-90s. So, fantastic, all around fantastic. I can't say enough good things. There was this one little part where they were explaining why a character was the way she was, and it actually turned out to be a lie, but the initial reasoning of why she was the way she was is something that I love to read and learn about. It's based on an actual event. This little thing they were trying to attribute her weirdness to. I can't get into it because it would be a spoiler, but it was awesome. I was like, oh my god, this is referenced. Hell yeah, this book is like freaking made for me. That is what I felt like when I read this book. An easy 5 star, and like I said, I had other 5s in April, but this was my very, very favorite book and very, very favorite 5-star read of April, for sure, hands down. And last, but certainly not least, I read a wonderful coming-of-age book, and it wasn't really even a horror book. I read We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. This was kind of long, but it was very enjoyable. If you like lots of characters, if you like well-developed characters, if you like coming-of-age, you might enjoy this book. It's not your traditional horror coming-of-age, because really, even though the back of the book hints that there's witchcraft in the story, it's not the kind of witchcraft that you would find in a horror book. It's more about younger people on the verge of adulthood, finding out who they really are. We're following a girls' field hockey team, which is very unique. And it's a girls' coming-of-age story, which I find very, very unique, too. So you don't usually find that. Usually coming of age, it focuses on boys. So I like that this one focuses on a group of girls, but there's also one boy involved too. All very, very well done. Lots of emotional parts near the end when you're finding out, like, how everything turned out. I had a wonderful time with this. It was a 4-star for me. Highly recommend. If you don't mind more literary books, I would say it leans towards just being a literary fiction type of book versus any kind of horror or thriller book. Alright guys, that is everything that I read in the month of April. I think I had a pretty great reading month, honestly. It was a fantastic month. And I read everything really I wanted to read, minus a few things. I definitely finished all of the prompts for our little bingo board. And I even did multiple books for some of the prompts, like the animal attack prompt. I read 3 books for that. So let me tell you a little bit about my stats real quick. I will say that numbers aren't really important, but I am a nerd and I like looking at stats. So I'm just going to go through quickly a little bit of my stats here. I read 3,186 pages. I approximately listened to 1,469 minutes of audio. I had an average rating of 4.15, which is really good. I did borrow 1 book from the library, and 3 of my reads I classified as diverse reads for one reason or another. So overall, very, very awesome. I had a mixture of newer published books and old school books that were published, more than 20 years ago, or at least 20 years ago or more, I should say. And I also had a mixture of adult reads with some other middle grade reads, which I thought was a great mix. So I had a little bit of everything, and I think it all worked out. And quickly, I'm going to go through with you guys what I ended up watching for Old School April. I watched Scream. I'm going to go through the movies first. Free Willy, The Rock. I watched In the Mouth of Madness, Ghostbusters, Homeward Bound, Con Air, which I had never seen before. I watched Barracuda, which was so bad, but so bad that it was really entertaining because we were watching it as a group watch party and the chat was so funny. I'm so glad I watched it that way. I also rewatched Night of the Lepus. That was kind of a animal attack movie and it's about bunnies attacking, so that was for Easter. I rewatched 101 Dalmatians, the Disney animated movie, for different reasons. If you guys were at any of our sprints, you might have heard me talk about the epic collie from that movie that looks like Richard Gere, at least in my opinion. Some people don't think he looks like Richard Gere, but whatevs. I also rewatched Teen Witch. We watched that as a watch party. That was a lot of fun. I rewatched The Muppet Movie. It had been years and years since I saw it. Such a cute, emotional movie. It made me tear up, I must admit, at some points. I rewatched Bring It On for the first time in maybe 15 years, and that was a watch party. And that might have been my favorite rewatch of the entire month. That was so much freaking fun to rewatch, especially with a group of people. It was just fantastic. Brr, it's cold in here. There must be some toros in the atmosphere. I said brr, it's cold in here. Okay, I'm sorry. It was so much fun. Oh God. All right, and I also watched The Rescuers. It's, of course, a Disney animated movie. I had a good time with that one. So I watched 14 movies throughout the month, which is pretty good. Not as good as I did last year with how many movies I was able to watch, but still pretty darn good considering how much I read as well. And I also watched a lot of TV episodes. Most of these are from our watch parties on Saturday mornings where we all watched cartoons, which was amazing. I love that we had Saturday morning cartoons every Saturday in the month. Thanks to anyone who joined me for any of the Saturdays. So we did episodes of Rugrats for that. We did an episode of Tales from the Crypt Keeper. We did an episode of Bobby's World, which everyone ripped apart. A lot of people didn't like it. We did an episode of X-Men, the animated series. We did a couple of episodes of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? We did a couple of episodes of Adventures of the Gummy Bears. We did a couple of episodes of Ren and Stimpy, a couple of episodes of Care Bears. We also had a Snick Night where we watched Kenan and Kel and Are You Afraid of the Dark? Also, we watched The Real Ghostbusters, some episodes of The Smurfs, Inspector Gadget, Winnie the Pooh, The Flintstones, lots of awesome cartoons. We did Garfield and Friends, we did DuckTales, we did the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. We also did a few episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog, which I had never seen before, somehow. Also, I watched a couple of episodes on my own, apart from any kind of watch party. I really had a great time watching The Goldbergs with Paul. That is a new show, but of course it takes place back in the 80s, so we were watching lots of episodes of the final season, so that was a lot of fun. We also watched Just Shoot Me, me and Paul. We also watched News Radio, just one episode of each of those. I watched an episode of Ah Real Monsters. I also watched an episode of Dawson's Creek and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I did that as a watch party. Also watched an episode of ER, specifically the pilot episode, which is one of my favorite episodes of ER. I just was a huge fan of ER growing up as a kid. And also, I was a big fan of it in college. I rewatched a lot of the show in college on DVD. So yeah, that was so much fun. I had a blast. Tons of TV episodes watched throughout the month. Freaking, apparently, according to my Track.tv app, it says that I watched an equivalent of 1 day, 15 hours, and 59 minutes of content, which is incredible. And that doesn't count all the time I spent sprinting. So I am so happy with everything I was able to watch, to read, along with everything I had to do that month. Like, for being the host, I had to, sprint a lot. Also had to basically score everybody's points, which I did manually a lot of times, so that took forever. So all of that together, I'm so proud of how it turned out, and I'm so happy that so many people seem to have such a great time. P.S. I am still working on a slideshow of everybody's fun pictures that they sent in. I am going to have that very, very soon. It might not even be till next month, and I know we are far removed from April at this point, but I feel like it's never too late to look back. That's what Old School April is all about, so it's never too late to look back at April. Just like in April, it's never too late to look back at your childhood or back at anything that's old school to you and nostalgic to you. So, guys, thanks so much for going down memory lane with me, both now, when I'm looking back at April, and in April itself, looking back to times where we feel nostalgic. But for this time, that is it for me, guys. Till next time, you guys know what you can do. Keep on killing it. Bye, guys.